Good morning, everybody. I'm not, I don't know. This Friday is feeling more like a Monday. But it is Friday. Yay, yay, yay. How is everybody? How are we all doing? So we are doing the second part to my neon my neon stuff. The neon glow in the dark order that I'm busy with. I did let me just show you. I did cookies. So on Wednesday we did the marshmallow pops, and it looks really, really good on the dark. So I think because they're going to be in a dark place that's glow in the dark, I was a bit concerned about doing white chocolate on the cakesicles. So I'm going to actually do it in milk chocolate as well, and then the colors, because then the colors will stand out more. I'm worried that the white, even with the cookies, this is my lion, which I think came out quite nicely. But what I'm worried about is when in the ultraviolet light, I'm not sure how well these colors will show up on this white. So that's why I've decided I'm going to make my cakesicles with milk chocolate. So I'm probably not going to talk much today either. Again, I'm just probably going to just play some music, or I was playing some inspirational mindset, positive mindset stuff the other day. I'm just going to get on with things this morning so that I can get them done. I'm busy melting my chocolate for my cakesicles. I do, however, need to make buttercream for my cake, my cupcakes. So I'll do that as well now while my chocolate is melting, and then we'll get on. I need to do cakesicles first because I need the royal icing to dry so that I can package them. And then, yeah, so hopefully we are done by 12, but yeah, that's what we'll be doing. I'm going to switch off all my cameras and my logo so that you can see what's putting. And then there will be, I'm doing a, yeah, I'm going to do the same thing as I did the other day, where I'm listening to something about being positive and having a positive mindset. It's just, yeah, something different to listen to other than just music. If you don't like it, let me know. And as usual, as usual, if you don't want to listen to it, you can always mute it and just watch me, whatever I'm doing. Okay, so let me get on with things. And yeah, I'm not going to do much instructing because I don't feel like anything needs any kind of instructing. It's the same old. It's cakesicles, dipping chocolate, all that kind of stuff. So not much is being, there's nothing new to learn, but you can watch and watch me how I do it. Right, let me get on with that. I do want to mute my mic. I'll chat to you just now.
Life. You're not going to be judged by your intentions. You're going to be judged entirely by your results. And the only way to get results is to take action. Action at the end of the day is the bedrock of everything. It's the bedrock of a growth mindset. It's the bedrock of success, of accomplishment. Everything comes back to not what you think, but what you actually do. make that the absolute core of your existence, that you're not going to be afraid to fail, and you're going to move forward. You're always going to take action. You're going to have a massive bias towards action. You're going to create momentum in your life. When you start doing that, when your reaction to every situation is to learn by doing, then you're going to become an unstoppable force. But it comes from recognizing that the most rich data stream in the world comes from action. If you've embraced that everything is your fault, you are well on your way to achieving whatever it is that you want in life. Now, this isn't about blame. It's not about feeling badly about yourself. This is about simply remembering that you're always in control. And by that, I mean you can always make a different decision, and making a different decision gives you the possibility of having a different outcome. If you're looking to blame anyone or anything external beyond yourself, you then start playing the role of the victim. So even though you may have every right to blame somebody else, it doesn't serve you. So that's why you're going to take ownership of everything you do in your life, down to the last microgram of decision. It's all your fault. And from there, everything becomes possible. As Henry Ford said, when everything seems to be going against you, remember that the airplane takes off against the wind, not with it. And the reason this is so important to understand is that inevitably there are going to be times in your life where it literally seems like the world is coming after you. And in those moments, if rather than panic, if rather than letting your mind run away from you, rather than getting bitter or angry or frustrated, if you remember in those times that forcing yourself to push through it, forcing yourself to find the opportunity, forcing yourself to find the lesson in that is going to be the very thing that gives you lift. It's actually constraints. It's having restrictions. It's having difficult times. Those are the things that allow people to really find and tap into the thing that's going to allow them to achieve what they want to achieve, because it's going to push you. And I know that's never fun. That's not what anybody wants to hear. But the reality is, if you want to achieve something great in your life, you've got to be going into the hard places. You've got to be facing down the difficult things. You've got to be going down that road that is intrinsically difficult. It's untamed. It's wild. And in that sense that it's coming after you, in that sense that you've entered truly hostile territory, in that is the very thing that's going to lift you up and allow you to do what other people haven't done. That's exactly why the terrain seems hostile. That's exactly why it seems like things are crashing down around you. Because you ventured into the unknown. But it's only in the unknown that you're going to be able to find yourself. It's only in the unknown that you're going to be able to accomplish something that other people think is impossible. Because they only think it's impossible because no one's ever done it. And as Tullius Cicero said, whatever you do, do with all your might. So as you go into this wilderness of the untamed, as you venture into this dangerous territory, go like a bat out of hell. Go like you've got something to prove. Go with a chip on your shoulder. Go knowing that you're going to face danger. Go knowing that you're going to have to stand up for yourself and you're going to have to fight for what you believe. Go knowing that you've got to get stronger. Go knowing that right now, you're not the person you need to be in order to be successful. Go now, knowing that failure is guaranteed. Go now, knowing that in that failure, you will learn what you need. And by being willing to face that failure and being willing to learn from that and putting all of your energy into getting better, into taking responsibility, into focusing who you want to become. But you've got to do it with everything you've got. Anything less is guaranteed failure. The trouble with not having a goal is that you can spend your life running up and down the field and never score. And And that's where people lose years of their life. There's so much busyness and running up and down the field. There's so much sense of action and accomplishment that they realize that there's no objective because they don't know what they're reaching for. They don't know what their goal is. And as deadly simple as that sounds, step number one, have a goal. Make it specific. Make sure you know the rules of the game you're playing. Make sure you know what a win looks like. In fact, that may be the most important question that you could ask yourself. The most pointed thing that you could determine in your life is to know, what does it look like to win? Once you know what it looks like to win, then you can work backwards. Then you can figure out what you need to do to score. Then you can figure out the skills that you're going to need in order to get great, in order to go out and dominate, in order to be better than anyone that has ever come before you. But to do that, you've got to know what your goal is. And once you have that, as Dale Carnegie said, if you want to conquer fear, don't sit home and think about it. Go out and get busy. So now you have your goal. Now you're telling people what you're going to do. Now you're telling yourself who you're going to become. You're building something up inside of you, but are you actually taking the action? Are you actually getting out and doing something about it? And it is terrifying to me how people can pacify themselves with a sense of accomplishment simply by having a goal, simply by telling people that they're going to do something, simply by fantasizing about what they're going to accomplish. And let me tell you right now, the thing that separates the people who dream from the people who execute is a willingness to act. And at the end of the day, nothing is going to stop you. Not fear, not inability, not inadequacy. The only thing that will stop you is failing to start. Failing to start is your mortal enemy. You've got to find a way to get yourself going. You've got to find a way to take that desire, that interest in you, and turn it into a raging inferno, something that's going to get you moving and going ahead, that will trample everything in its path. Once you're able to do that, nothing, and I mean nothing, will be able to stop you. As John Wayne said, courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. Here's the secret. The people that do the most with their lives, the people that seem the most self-assured, the ones that seem to embody confidence, the ones that seem to define confidence, they're the ones that had to face down the most fear. They simply didn't linger in it. They faced up. They took action. And in action, they began to tame the fear. And that's the most ironic thing about being a human, is the very thing that you're terrified of doing, actually taking a step into the unknown, taking that step is the very thing that will cure the fear. It's the very thing that's going to suppress that. It's the very thing that's going to give you the confidence, because in that moment, all you're trying to do is process what's around you, and your brain does not have the opportunity to explore and be afraid at the same time. And when you understand that, when you understand that the ally that you have is movement, the ally that you have is momentum, the thing that you don't need to be afraid of is fear, because that will be quelled by doing something. That will be quelled by facing your fear. That will be quelled by saddling up even when you are at your most terrified. And as Samuel Johnson said, great works are performed not by strength, but by perseverance. It's facing that fear and going after it anyway. It's falling down, the very thing that you were terrified of, embarrassing yourself in front of people, and getting back up. And that's the key. Getting back up is all that matters. You're all going to fall. Every one of us are going to embarrass ourselves, not once, not twice, but over and over and over, if we're lucky, because it means that we tried. It means that we got up. It means that we cured our fear by taking action. It means that we took a risk. It means that we put something at risk. It means that we took that fragile part of ourselves that lives inside, that wants to hide, that wants to move backwards, and we ripped it open and we laid it bare, and we said, what will come, and whatever it is, I'm going to learn from that. Whatever it is, I'm going to push through that. Whatever it is, I'm going to persevere, because on the other side of perseverance is a sense of self, a sense of confidence, of being reborn, of being something new, because you built upon yourself. You took that ember of fear and you turned it into something powerful, because you weren't afraid. You didn't back down. You weren't worried that that would be a permanent state. You understood that it was only a step on a longer journey. And when you can see your life as a long journey, and that you know perseverance is what it demands, then you'll stay the course. Then you'll win. As Maya Angelou said, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. That's some of the best advice you're ever going to hear. At the end of the day, you should always be trying to change the things that you have the ability to change. But there are inevitably going to be things that you can't change. But you're never helpless. You're never a victim. In that moment, you still have the unbelievable ability to choose to look at it in a new way, to choose to reframe it. And in that reframing, you change everything. You don't just change your own neurochemistry. You're not just changing the way that you feel. You're actually changing the way that you're going to approach the problem. Something that was moments before, something that seemed impossible, something that was breaking your will to continue to fight. With a change in attitude becomes something completely different. And as Hans Selye said, adopting the right attitude can turn a negative stress into a positive one. And that game of mental jujitsu is what it's about. That game of flipping something on its head, of turning something around, of seeing it in a new way so that you can act in a new way is how you make forward progress. Understanding that, understanding your need to change your perspective, that's how you begin to get ahead. Once you understand that your perspective is a choice, it is not objective truth. Burn that into your mind. It is not objective truth. The world that you see around you is simply the perspective through which you see it. All of life is a funhouse mirror. And when you acknowledge that, when you understand that you're looking at a distorted view of the way the world is, you realize that you can adopt a different distortion. You can adopt a distortion that allows you to see things more clearly, that allow you to see things in a way that empower you. And that should always be the first step, is figuring out not what is, not what you can change, but instead understanding what you need to change it to. And understanding that that change comes from inside you. It isn't a manifestation that you have to make in the outside world first. It's a change you have to make inside yourself. It is a shift of perspective. It is simply stepping to the side of what you're used to and how you're used to seeing things, and understanding that in reframing things, you take that negative and turn it into something that builds you up. But you've got to choose. You've got to decide. You've got to believe that you can do it. But once you believe that you can see things in any way that you need to reach your goals, your life will change forever, because you'll actually reach your goals. As Helen Keller said, optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope and confidence. And that's the trick. It really is faith. It really is doing something even though you have nothing in the world telling you that it's real. It's something that you have to choose to believe in. It's something that is going to allow you to do incredible things simply because you believe that you can do them. But if you don't start with that optimistic belief, if you don't start by burning into yourself, by reinforcing over and over and over in your mind that things can and will work out, that your efforts are going to be rewarded, to believe to the core of your being that the harder you work, the more you're going to learn. The more you learn, the more you'll be able to do. The more you'll be able to do, the more you'll be able to manifest your dreams. But you have to start with that faith that that's real. It would be just as easy to look into the world and see only the negative things. But once you understand that you can choose to have faith that things are going to work, that you can believe in something long before you have the evidence for it, and you can believe in it because you know that's how the mind works. That's where humans generate their power. They don't generate it from seeing some evidence of something in the world. We generate our power by first believing that our efforts will be rewarded. You have to put that at the center of your being. And as Wayne Dyer said, be miserable or motivate yourself. Whatever has to be done is always your choice. So if you want to do something, recognize there's no obstacle holding you back other than what you choose to believe. And if you want to be miserable, it's going to be there for you. And if you want to be empowered, it's there for you. If you want strength, it is there for you. It's a decision. It's something that you decide to believe in, that you can get strong. And that ultimately is the ultimate strength, to believe that you can get better, to believe that you can become whatever you want to become. So choose optimism right now. Choose to let it fill you. Choose to feel it, to sit in that sensation that anything you set your mind to is possible. When you allow yourself to embody that, to believe it, no matter what anybody tells you, no matter how many people tell you that you're stupid, you're a failure, that you're never going to do anything, that you are going to believe in yourself. If you can do that, if you can choose that optimism, you can go anywhere. Because you realize everything you needed was in you all along. It was simply choosing to believe you could execute against it. So have that faith. Go out and do it. As Matsuo Basho said, do not seek to follow in the footsteps of others. Instead, seek what they sought. This is about knowing not what others have done. This is about not chasing somebody or replicating somebody or imitating somebody. This is about figuring out what you want. What do you want? And then really growing to understand that, really beginning to form your own opinion. And it doesn't mean that you don't listen to other people. It doesn't mean that you don't sit at somebody's feet and learn from them. It simply means that the goal is not imitation. The goal is understanding. And when you go into learning something, knowing that that thing has utility, that when you get that skill, when you really understand that thing, what it's doing is giving you a brick that you're going to be able to build something with. But remember, the goal is the building. The goal is to create something that didn't exist before. And the only way to do that is to actually understand what you're doing. Mimicking the motions of somebody else will not allow you to create something that has never been before. It will not allow you to bring something into the world that has never before been seen. It will only allow you to replicate. And your goal in life isn't to be a copy machine. Your goal in life is to express yourself, to create things that only you can create, that your mind in this time period, with all the unique things that you've encountered, that you've learned, the connections that you've made, the way that you bring things together, that's never ever going to exist again. It's all you uniquely. That's your job in this life, is to build something from that place. But to do that, you actually have to understand what it is that you want. And as Erwin McManus said, there are few things more powerful than a life lived with passionate clarity. But that clarity only comes when you understand. It only comes when you take your time learning to really grasp the concept, to not read a book to tell someone that you've read it, to not complete a task to check it off a list. The goal is to actually understand how to use that thing. Knowledge isn't power. Used knowledge is power. Putting that to use to actually do something. Understanding it well enough to create from that thing. That's the end goal. So don't worry about what other people think. Don't worry about what other books other people have read. Don't worry if you ever make it to the last page of anything. Simply ask yourself, do I understand what I need to understand to build the life I want to build, to bring to this world the things that I want to bring? However counterintuitive, however weird, it doesn't matter. If it's a moment of beauty for you and you understand how to build it, build it. That's the greatest joy you're ever going to experience in life, is being truly and uniquely yourself. But first you have to do the work to understand who you really are. Do that work. As Gloria Steinem says, the truth will set you free, but first, it will piss you off. The reality is, if you want to achieve something great in your life, you've got to be willing to accept who you really are right now. You've got to know exactly what you're good at and what you're not. And the reason that the truth is going to piss you off is it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt to acknowledge that you're not yet who you want to be. It's going to hurt to know that you're not yet capable of the things that you want to be capable of. And it's really going to hurt to know that the things that people say behind your back, the things that they say to hurt you, that they're actually true, that they're right. They have a point. You aren't good at that thing. You aren't as good as you could be. You did embarrass yourself. You have fallen down. All of those things are almost certainly true. But when you can look at those things, when you can stare nakedly at your inadequacies, when you can really stop and not protect yourself with ego, but protect yourself by knowing that you're going to learn from where you failed. You're going to learn from the places you've fallen down. You're going to learn your inadequacies so that you can build something new. And as Michio Kaku says, all great ideas come from a picture. You've got to know what you want. You've got to know what that thing is that you're building towards. You've got to know exactly who you're trying to become. And once you have that crystal clear vision of who you want to be, it is far easier to acknowledge who you really are. So you've got to start with that picture. You've got to accept the reality, pain and all. But you've got to have that picture. You've got to know where you're going. You've got to know what the skills are that you need to build in order to get there. And once you do that, once you have that picture, and that picture is your obsession, it's the thing that you think about, you dream about, you put it up on your wall, you tattoo it in your mind, you know exactly who you're trying to become. If you're honest with yourself about where you are, and you know exactly where you want to go, you can go anywhere. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and today it's brought to you by our friends at Wix.
We all want to fulfill our potential, and sadly most people don't. And I believe that it's because this is what we want in our lives. This is who we are.
Hey everybody, welcome to Impact Theory. Our goal with this show and company is to introduce you to the people and ideas that will help you actually execute on your dreams. All right, today's guest is the best-selling author of Miracle Morning and one of the highest-rated keynote speakers in America. His book has sold more than 600,000 copies worldwide, has been translated into 27 languages, and his teachings are being practiced by more than 500,000 people daily in more than 70 countries. But all of that almost never happened. At the age of 20, he was involved in a catastrophic drunk driving accident that was so violent it ripped his car in half and actually took his life. His heart stopped beating for a full 6 minutes, and over the next week, as he lay in a coma, he died 2 more times. After 7 surgeries in just 6 days to repair the extensive damage he sustained, including 11 broken bones, he finally stabilized, but doctors warned that he may never walk again. But not only did he walk again, through sheer force of will, he ended up running a 52-mile ultra marathon and recovering fully. But just as everything in his life were finally humming along, he found himself near death once again. This time, it was a very rare, very aggressive form of cancer that took him from symptom-free to the verge of multiple organ failure in just days. He immediately began a brutal chemotherapy regimen and once again, through discipline of thought and action, saw his way through and back to health. But just surviving is not his mission. He wants to help others thrive as well. And his unique ability to teach the lessons he's learned are allowing him to do just that. So please, help me in welcoming the man whose book has over 2,000 5-star reviews on Amazon, the Hall of Fame business achiever, Hal Elrod. How are you doing, man?
Good to see you, Tom.
Yeah, you as well, dude. Very excited to sit down and talk. And what's crazy is even all the madness that I talked about in the intro, I didn't get to cover one of the crazier parts, which was what happened when the economy went bust in 2008. You lost like half of your income and had to fight your way back from that.
Yeah.
And I want to understand, like, the thing that really seems incredible about you is your ability to regulate your emotions, to get back on track, and to keep pushing forward. So what was that like in that moment? You said that you were depressed or close to depression. How did you restabilize?
So I was 20 when I had the car accident. And a year and a half before that, I had started a career in direct sales. And I learned something in my training from my manager called the 5-minute rule. And he said that when you're out there in the field, you're going to have disappointment, you're going to have rejection, you're going to set a goal for the week, you're not going to hit it, you're going to hit it, and then have the order cancel. Like, he's like, you're going to deal with a lot of stuff. It's a microcosm for life. And he taught us what he calls the 5-minute rule. He said, so when things go wrong, we have a rule. It's okay to be negative, but not for more than 5 minutes. Give yourself 5 minutes, set your timer on your phone. You would literally teach us, set the timer. You get 5 minutes to bitch, moan, complain, cry, vent, punch a wall, whatever. And after 5 minutes, you take a deep breath and say 3 really powerful words. Can't change it. And it's simply an acknowledgement that I can't change what's already happened. So there's no value in wishing it were different. And essentially, I learned through reading Eckhart Tolle and things through years after that every negative emotion that we have is self-created by the degree of resistance that we have to our reality. Whether it's past reality, whether it's happening right now, or whether it's even a projected future reality that we're afraid of. And so in the span of 5 minutes, I woke up, I was told I would never walk again. I had 11 broken bones, permanent brain damage, and I went, well, can't change it. And the doctors thought I was delusional because I was so happy. I told my dad, I said, Dad, there's 2 possibilities. Number 1, the doctors are right and I'll never walk again. And I said, and I've already decided, I've imagined that possibility. Okay, I'm in a wheelchair the rest of my life. I promise, Dad, because my parents were concerned, the doctors were concerned. I said, I promise I'll be the happiest person you've ever seen in a wheelchair. Because I'm in a wheelchair either way. I'm going to be happy. I'll be grateful. Why be miserable just because that's my unchangeable circumstance? And I said, the possibility number 2 is I will walk again. And I don't even know if it's possible, but I do know that that's what I want. So I've accepted the worst case scenario. I'm at peace with it. And all of my energy is going into walking again. I think about it every day. I visualize it. I pray about it. I talk about it, imagine it. And a week later, the doctors came in with routine x-rays. And they said, we don't know how to explain this, but your body is healing so quickly. We're going to let you take your first step tomorrow. And that was 3 weeks after the accident. It went from like never walking again. And I'm thinking maybe like in a year, not in 3 weeks. And then I took my first step the next day. So I share that kind of backstory because every adversity that I've had since then, I'm able to leverage the lesson of, hey, if I can't change it, the only intelligent choice I have if I want to be happy is to accept it. 2008 was hard. It was actually harder for me to deal with than the car accident. And I think the reason is the car accident was the worst thing I'd imagine happening to me happen. And then it could only really get better from there. Like I was in the hospital, I woke up from a coma. It's like, okay, I'm going to heal over time, right? With the economy, when it crashed, it's like I lost a couple clients. I'm delusional, first of all, right? Like there's a fine line between optimism and delusion. You probably cross it too sometimes, right? But I would, people be like, you're really worried about the economy? I go, I create my own economy. I don't watch the news. I don't pay attention to it, right? And I guess it was, I'm losing client after client after client after client because they were affected by the economy and they couldn't pay me. And after I lost my first client, I went, oh man, can't change it. 5-minute rule, all right, that's a bummer, man. I've never lost a client. And then within a matter of weeks, I lost, or about a month, I lost half of my clients, half of my income, couldn't pay the mortgage. And so I got really scared and really depressed. Like the can't change it thing wasn't work because it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, like this downward spiral. So yeah, and that's when I did some Google searching. I was just simply trying to figure out what are the world's most successful people doing that I'm not doing. And I kept coming across morning rituals and morning routines, but I went, I'm not a morning person. Like, what else do they do? Like, where's the night owl, like, success plan, right? And I finally saw one, I don't remember the headline, but it caught my attention, and I went, I got to read this. And I dove in, and this was 2007, so morning rituals now, are everybody talks about them, they're all over the place. They weren't quite as prevalent. And I realized that it was the one thing that most of the world's most successful people had in common. And then I went, okay, I'm going to wake up an hour earlier tomorrow and start a morning ritual. Then the question was, what am I going to do during that hour to really maximize it? I want it to be the ultimate morning ritual. So I ended up continuing down my Google searching and came up with 6. It was meditation, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, and journaling. And I went, which of these is the one thing I should do? Which is the best? Which is going to change my life the fastest? And the epiphany happened when I went, what if I did all of these? What if I woke up tomorrow, I did the 6 most timeless, scientifically proven personal development practices in the history of the world that, for centuries they've been working for people. And the next morning I woke up, even though I wasn't a morning person, did all 6. And I went from being depressed and scared to like my mental and emotional, I was at a peak. I went, wow, if I start every day like this, it's only a matter of time. And it was less than 2 months that I doubled my income, decided to run that ultra marathon that you'd mentioned. And it felt like a miracle. I told my wife, I said, sweetie, this is like a miracle. She's like, it's like your miracle morning. I go, yeah, it's my miracle morning. So I started writing my schedule as my miracle morning. It was never a book idea. And the light bulb went off that I went, well, if this is changing my life and I wasn't a morning person, and it's changing all of my clients' lives, and none of them were morning people, this could change the world. Like, I have a responsibility to get this message out there.
No, man, it's such an extraordinary story. When you were telling that, you said something that really caught my attention, and that's the duality of, I accept that I can't change it, and there's something that I really, really want. So maybe I'm never going to walk again, and I can come to peace with that. But over here, I'm thinking, I'm praying, I'm visualizing about getting up and walking. And I know that you've used that in other places in your life. How do you maintain that duality? How do you talk about that to other people? Because to me, I've always told people you have to be able to hold two conflicting ideas in your head. Like, it is, and I don't remember where I heard this, but that one of the hallmarks of real success is the ability to do that. And hearing you talk about it when the stakes are as high as I may never walk again, was the first time I heard somebody that had that much on the line talk about that duality. Tell me a little bit more about that and how you manage that.
Yeah, and you mentioned how do I talk about that or teach it, right? Like, when I'm brought in, every keynote that I give is the miracle morning. It's always like a CEO that read the book and he's like, you got to come teach our sales team or our staff or whatever, right? So that's why I'm brought in. For 10 years as a keynote speaker, I was telling my accident story and teaching this lesson of the power of accepting what you can't change and giving yourself the gift of emotional, I call it emotional invincibility, right? And it's where you're invincible from any emotions controlling you, and you're in control of your emotions. And so I talk about how, what you said, the duality, where the more we want something, usually, the more disappointed we are when we don't get it, right? And, or devastated, right? The more we want it, right? It's that spectrum of, if you really are like, you want it more than anything in the world, then if you don't get it, you're devastated, you're suicidal. I mean, you're right. And so I think that for me, it takes practice. Now, we say this to the audience. They go, how many of you think this is really a powerful idea? It makes a lot of sense, but it's easier said than done. And everybody's hand goes up like, yeah, this is crazy, right? I get it, but I can't do that. And it's because we're not addicted, but we've programmed ourselves over our entire lives. The way we respond to adversity is the way we respond to adversity, right? So, for example, traffic is usually a low level of adversity. If you're running late and you leave late because you woke up late or kids were whatever it was, you hit traffic. What's the response normally?
Frustration.
I'm stressed, I'm frustrated, right? And we literally spend the entire drive. So let's say it's normally a 30-minute drive to work and it takes us 45 or whatever because of traffic. You live in LA, right? You know it better than anybody. But we spend that entire 45 minutes literally killing ourselves, right? Being that we're stressed out, we're tense, we're frustrated, we're riding the car in front of us. Like, does that work? That doesn't move them, right? You know? And I realized that, so people think, well, I'm upset because of this thing. We always have something to point to. Of course I'm angry. Look at what she did. Of course I'm sad. Look at what I lost. Of course I'm frustrated. I need to be at work in a half an hour and this is going to take me 45 minutes, right? We think it's the thing. We always point at the thing. And when I realized it's never the thing. It's our resistance to the thing. So when I was like anybody, I hit traffic and I'd be frustrated or upset or, mad at myself that I left late or mad at the person that made me late or whatever. And then I went, wait a minute. I actually used to have these wristbands that said can't change it that I used to give out to high school students after my speeches. And I'd be driving and I'd see my wristband and I'd go, oh yeah, wait, this applies, I can't change traffic. I would take a deep breath and I would just go, I'm going to enjoy the ride. And I would turn the radio on and enjoy. And so all of a sudden, traffic had zero control over my emotional state. And so whether it's traffic or it's being in a horrific car accident, we are completely in control of our emotional state. And the key that unlocks the door to emotional invincibility, if you will, is acceptance. It's accepting it. And so let me wrap this up answering your question of how do you get there. For me, it was logic. I went, okay, I can't change that I was in a car accident. It's kind of like what I said with the wheelchair thing, right? So if I'm in a wheelchair the rest of my life, I could either be miserable in a wheelchair and blame the wheelchair and the drunk driver and the car accident and all that. That's why I'm miserable, right? The victim mentality. I thought, that's no quality of life. And so I think for any of us, we go, well, yeah, I don't want to be stressed out in traffic. So virtually the only choice we have, if we don't want to be stressed out or depressed or, and I'm not talking clinical depression, that's a different state, but, right, is to accept our circumstances unconditionally. That's where I call it emotional invincibility. That's where when you get to that point of where you've accepted everything that's ever going to happen to you and you've made peace with it before it even happens. So when it happens, you're like, oh, okay, this sucks. Worst thing that I could ever imagine, but I can't change it. So I'm not going to, like, problems are difficult enough to move through and overcome. Why add emotional turmoil to those problems? It doesn't help you get through the problem. In fact, it simply makes it harder, it takes longer, or it prevents you from solving the problem altogether because you're so emotionally engaged in it. You can't see, the sunshine through the clouds.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And I think having that emotional resilience is life-changing. Now, you said something that I think is really powerful, and that is when you're dealing with people that really want something, it's the thing they want most in life, or they're about to lose something, and it's the thing that they're most terrified about losing. What do you say about still allowing yourself to want something, believe in it, even though the more you invest in getting it, the more you think about it, people can feel like the farther I'm going to fall. Like the more people I tell I'm doing this, the more people I potentially embarrass myself in front of when it doesn't happen. How do you help them deal with that potential fear of embarrassment or failure or just outright disappointment?
I think that if you go to the age-old adage, everything happens for a reason. I believe that's true, but not the way that we've been taught or conditioned to think, right? Usually most people, that's used in a circumstance where something terrible happens, right? You lose something, right? Well, everything happens for a reason. It's going to be okay. You're like, screw you and your reason. So to me, because people think it's predetermined, right? Or they look up to the heavens and they're like, why did this, what did I do to deserve this, right? Like they're searching for a reason outside of themselves. And it's really just perpetuating the victim mindset versus I believe that everything happens for a reason, but it's 100% our responsibility to choose the reason. And so I think that if you can go into any endeavor, pursuing it, knowing that if I fail at this, and on a side note, the book Failing Forward by John Maxwell, I don't know if you've read that, right? But that was a huge game changer for me where I went, almost every successful person failed at something that they really worked hard for, they were striving for, they might have committed their entire life to, and then they failed, and then they learned and grew from it if they chose to do so, and then they achieved something even better, right? Every relationship that ends creates a space for a new relationship, right? Every venture that comes to a screeching halt creates space for a new venture. So I'm not saying that it's easy, and you might need the 5-minute rule, or if you need 5 days to and by the way, I don't think negative emotions, like call them negative, I don't think they're negative, meaning there's value in all emotions. If I were to lose a loved one, I would grieve, and I think it's healthy to grieve, right? If a man accosted my wife, I'd probably pull anger out of my pocket and get a little, right? So there's definitely value, I believe, in all emotions, but the difference is whether the emotions are controlling the person, right? Because they think they don't understand. They think it's the thing that's causing the anger, and because of the thing that's out of their control, the anger's out of their control, right? So I think that once you take full responsibility for your emotional state, no matter what's going on around you, it's always about what's going on inside of you.
Yeah, I really like what you said about things like that. One, being a choice, and two, that you're creating space rather than that, the ending of a relationship means that you're going to have another relationship, which is not always the case. But it does create the space for you now to act in accordance with what you want, to get something new and different. But then what you were saying about looking outside yourself, looking to the heavens, why did this happen to me? It's a pretty strong impulse. And I have to say, in hearing your story, I was like, I might have thrown up why is this happening to me when you got diagnosed with cancer. It'd be one thing if you lived like if you're doing a bunch of drugs, you're smoking, eating terribly, but you weren't. You had, if I remember right, read a book about how to eat for anti-cancer benefits and had been doing that for years when you were diagnosed with cancer. Why didn't you say, why is this happening to me?
I mean, I definitely said that, but with a smile on my face. I was like, God, what in the heck am I supposed to learn? Like, I already died. I had my big life-altering thing. What could I possibly learn from another one? And a lot, ended up being the thing. But I will tell you this, there was no emotional pain. In fact, so I was diagnosed.
Because you had accepted life before it happened, is that what you're talking
Exactly, yes. And to be fair, like I have a new book coming out, and I talk about this a lot. There's a little chapter called Emotional Invincibility, and I talk about this, and I say, look, I had an unfair advantage in that I had, like for a major, the cancer thing, because I was able to look back and go, the car accident was the best thing that ever happened to me, because of who I became by overcoming it, right? By moving through it with a positive attitude and all of that. And also it became my life's work.
Talk to me about fear. Like I have from an emotional standpoint, I will put myself in the almost emotionally invulnerable, invincible position. Like I've spent an inordinate amount of time on that.
Yeah.
But I would have to process through some real fear, even if it was just, okay, now what happens to my wife? What happens to my family? So how did you deal with that?
Here's an important piece of this is when it comes to accepting all things that you can't change, death is one of those things. So I made peace with death a long time ago. And I think that death is a big fear for all of us. And to me, I've gotten to the point where I realize it doesn't even make sense for that to be a fear. For anything that's inevitable or that you can't change, right, that there's no point in resisting it and wishing it weren't going to happen. And the way that I look at death is it's the other side of birth. And we don't fear birth, right? But birth and death are both just as inevitable, and they're two sides of the same coin that is life, right?
But that's the one thing I've heard you say where I was like, and I'll say why. Birth gives, death takes, or such is my perception right now. And maybe you're about to give me a breakthrough, and I'm so fucking open to that you can't imagine. Yeah. But like the thing that I really want to understand, like how you've dealt with it internally, is that what, and maybe I'm packaging it wrong when I say it out loud, but that sense of I want something so badly, and thusly I am terrified to lose it. And the wanting is so powerful and so important and so beautiful that I know I don't want to give that up, but yet it creates the fear. It is like the old Buddhist notion of life is suffering because you want things, and you may not get them, because you want things, you may lose them. Like the love for a child, I imagine, I'm not a parent, I imagine is transformatively profound, but it fucking sucks you in, dude. And it gets you to the point where now, like right now, I'm not afraid to die except for my wife. Legitimately, for myself, whatever. Like I won't say that I'm not bothered, but it's like not a grand fear of mine. Even though I talk a lot about living forever, that's me moving towards something, not away from. I'm not moving away from death. I'm moving towards the things I would be able to do if I could live forever. But dude, the thought of having kids or the thought of leaving my wife behind, that shit makes me emotional. Yeah. And so I really want to know, like, how did you process through that? Because in there somewhere is a breakthrough for me, if nobody else.
Yeah. So that was the hardest thing. Like I said, because I've made peace with death, I was imagining my wife and my kids losing me, and especially my kids. Like the most important thing in my world, in my life, is that I can influence my children in a positive way to set them up for a great life, right? And so that I might not have that opportunity was the hardest thing to deal with. I think that part of it is I didn't spend a lot of time on thinking about that, right? So that's the thing, is people that have a lot of fear, you're thinking about the things that you're afraid of, right? You don't have the fear of, and if you're not thinking, right? If you're not thinking about the thing you're afraid of, but as soon as you're thinking about it, the fear comes up. So for me, I use affirmations a lot too. That's one of the Miracle Morning practices, is affirmations. And affirmations, I think, have a kind of a bad rap, like Stuart Smalley, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and people like me. And then they're taught by like a lot of self-help pioneers is like, lie to yourself. If you want to be a millionaire, just say, I am a millionaire over and over and over until you believe it, right? But if we know the truth, you're like, I'm a millionaire. Your brain's like, dude, no, you're not, right? You're like, shut up, I'm doing my affirmations, right? Like, so anyway, the point is, the way that I view affirmations is they simply direct your focus on wherever you want your focus directed. So you can literally, like a computer program, you can go, okay, what are the beliefs that I want to focus on so they expand inside of me? Even the thoughts that I want to focus on. What are my values? What are the behaviors that I need to embody, right? So you read these affirmations every day, and you're programming yourself to live in alignment with that program that you've designed, right? So I had my anti-cancer affirmations, which I still have. I use those to manage my mindset, right? So if I have a fear, I will look at what's the opposite of the fear. What's possible? So I could die, yes. does focusing on that I might die and dwelling on that, and right, and thinking about that and going down that rabbit hole. And most people they live with their fear. That's where their focus is. So they're consumed by fear, right? For me, I go, oh yeah, this could happen, and that's not what I want to happen. So I'm going to accept it, make peace with it, and then I'm going to put all of my energy into what I want. And affirmations to me are the best way to do that, because if we leave our brain up to whatever it's up to, dude, it's like, it's like a pinball bouncing around. It's like negative thought, positive thought, negative thought, negative, right? And so we can't trust our brain, until we've conditioned it, right? But so if someone's consumed with fear, right, utilizing affirmations every day that you combat the fear.
Give me the examples of your anti-cancer affirmations. I think there's statistically, sadly, a lot of people watching this that are battling cancer right now, and it might be particularly useful.
Before I shared that, I want to say, because for people battling cancer, I want to share what I did that's different than most. So like you said, I had watched a documentary called Healing Cancer from the Inside Out, like, I don't know, 5 or 10 years before I got cancer, and I'd lived an anti-cancer lifestyle. So yeah, I was like, how am I getting cancer? I eat like a plant-based diet. I don't understand. So I went to my oncologist when I was diagnosed, and my lung was collapsed, my kidneys were failing, and my heart was on the verge of failing when I went to my oncologist. And that was like what happened from healthy to a week or two later. And I said, hey, I'm not big on chemo. I view it as, it's poison. It's very toxic. I would like to, heal my cancer holistically, and I've been doing a lot of research on that. Can you support me in that? And he said, Hal, I appreciate that you want to do that, but he said, you don't have a cancer that you don't have that luxury. You've got about a week to live if you don't start chemo, maybe a few days. He said, look, a week ago you were healthy. Now your heart, lung, and kidney is all on the verge of failing. He said, this is one of the most aggressive, fast-acting cancers, and you literally have a few days, maybe a week. And I thought it was a scare tactic, right? I was like, like in my head, like kind of middle finger, like, oh, I don't, I said, give me 24 hours, let me go home and I'll find out the truth from Google. And so I consulted Dr. Google, right? And basically found out that, he wasn't exaggerating. So I found out that was true. So I basically almost, against my will, like everything, my values, my beliefs, I had to go get chemo. It's the most intensive chemotherapy regimen, to my knowledge, that there is. And so that even made it harder. And it's a 20 to 30% survival rate. So I go, so you're going to put this poison in me, and I have a 20 to 30% chance of surviving, and the side effects on one of the chemos in particular, so I had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The side effect may cause leukemia. And so what I ended up doing, because I felt like my hand was kind of, arm was forced, I had to do the chemo. So here's what I did though, and I think this is what not only saved my life, and the chemo, I believe, definitely saved my life, but my symptoms, and it was hard, but I had an easier time than a lot of people that were getting 1 hour of chemo a month when I was getting, 70 or 80 or 100, whatever it was. And what I did is I did everything holistically that I would do if I weren't doing chemotherapy. So, and I didn't, and I had never found anyone that really had done that. It was usually either or. But so I did coffee enemas, right? There's no effort more extraordinary than, sticking a tube in your butt. I took like 70 supplements a day. I did, my diet was already on point, so I just kind of, kept added juicing and some other things. I did ozone saunas. I did acupuncture. You name it, right? I did everything I could, and I combined the two. And like when I asked my oncologist, hey, chemo is really toxic to your liver, and some people get a lot of disease from that. What should I do to detox? And he'd be like, we give you a saline flush. It's fine, right? So the medical community, right, they don't learn anything except what's in the textbook that they go to school for. And so for me, I did I Googled how to detox your liver, right? So I was taking milk thistle to detox my liver, and the coffee enemas to detox my liver, and and all of these things. So I just wanted to share that because, like you said, people watching might have cancer or know someone that does. Anyway, so sorry I got far down the rabbit hole.
Really interesting. And another thing along those lines that I want to talk about is, you said that obviously you kept your mindset the way that you've always kept your mindset. You were very positive. You knew what you wanted. You had affirmations. But you said those work when you're not like just doubled over in agony. But in the days you're doubled over in agony, it basically knocks you for six. How did you deal with those days? How did you bounce back, rebuild your mindset?
So here's what's interesting is I experience negative emotions, right? And the difference is, what do you do with that emotion, right? So the emotion isn't the problem. It's what do you do with it? And so one thing that I've learned, and it's really powerful, and I learned this probably just in the last few years. In fact, maybe it was a cancer lesson, I don't know. But it was that when I have a negative emotion, you wake up and you feel depressed. I'm like, what? Like, I feel just horrible. I feel I have no confidence today. Like, I don't know why, right? Like hormones or something's going on, right? And what I realize is that it's not that emotional state that's the biggest problem for most people, myself included. It's what we do with that state, and we usually judge it, and we get afraid. Why do I feel this way? And the problem is, human beings, we're not good at space, like creating, understanding, like, what's the word? Spatial awareness in terms of time. We think the way we feel is just how life is, right? Like it's this all-encompassing, like, oh my God, this is how I'm going to feel the rest of my life. Like, we don't understand that. No, this is temporary. It might last a day. It might last 5 minutes. Don't make a big deal out of it, right? That's the most simple way I could put it. Don't make a big deal out of it. So when I had negative emotions with cancer, I just didn't make a big deal out of it. I go, this is temporary. So when you feel in a negative state, simply just remind yourself it's temporary, and even just smile and go, man, this sucks. Hopefully it's not too long that I feel like this, because I don't enjoy it. But don't give it a lot of importance. Don't give that temporary emotional state a significant amount of significance, right? Just go, this is temporary, I accept it, whatever. And so, there were a lot of hard days. And there were days where, I had this infection where my entire face swelled up like the elephant man. My eye was completely shut. I had horrific migraines. When you're in physical pain, I'm like anybody. I wasn't super positive. I was like, but I was as positive as it's always be as positive as you could possibly be, even when you're going through the most difficult time in your life. And that was the thing with cancer, with the car accident, and that's the lesson for everybody, is that we can consciously choose to be. First, you accept what you can't change, and then you go, what emotion would best serve me? And I think more often than not, it's gratitude and happiness for the most part, or optimism, as an emotion. But we can be the happiest and the most grateful we've ever been while we are going through the most difficult, painful, scary time in our lives. And here's the thing, it just makes it that much easier. It doesn't mean that it doesn't suck, but it means that you're not letting the fact that it sucks completely control your emotional well-being. You're going, this sucks, but I'm going to make the best of it.
How do you talk to your kids about this, man? Because how old are they?
Right now they just turned 9 and 6. So when I got cancer, I just had my 2-year anniversary of being diagnosed about a month ago. So they were 4 and 7.
And how do you talk to them about that? How do you try to give them mindset around what you went through, how to think about it for themselves?
My daughter, she went right when we told them I had cancer. And the way that we, told them is, hey, I have cancer. And some people die from cancer, but I'm going to do a lot of things that those people don't do, right? You have to explain it in a way that a child will understand, And I said, I actually have a plan. I'm going to do a lot of things that most people don't even know about that are going to make it so that I'm going to beat the cancer. Like, I have no doubt in my mind. And they're like, oh, okay. And then my daughter goes to school like the next day, and she says, my dad has cancer. She's telling people, her classmates, and her friend goes, oh, my grandpa died from cancer. And so she's like, oh my God, right? So but that was the whole thing was kind of just maintaining my mindset, which is, so I have this thing called the miracle equation. I came up with it when I was 20, when I was in sales, and it was to break a record that I had a very limited amount of time, and it felt like doing it would be a miracle. It was like pre-miracle morning. It's just a coincidence that, I guess I like the word miracle, I don't know, but it's just a coincidence that there's even a correlation. But it's the book that's going to come out next year, so I've been working on it. But here's the miracle equation, and it's how you create miracles, and when I say miracle, right, I don't mean parting the Red Sea or biblical miracles, but I mean extraordinary results that are beyond what you even believe is possible, right? It's really simple, 2 components: unwavering faith and extraordinary effort. And if you break down any person in history, yourself included, that has accomplished extraordinary results beyond what they, maybe as children or at whatever point in their lives, even imagine possible, right? I'm sure you, with quests and stuff you've done, you're like, I can't believe this is like I do. I can't believe this happened, right? But every single person, those were the two common denominators. They established faith that they could accomplish something that they had never accomplished. They had no evidence in their past that they were even capable of it, right? So they just went out on that's why it's faith, right? It's out on a limb, like, I can do this. I don't know how, but I can do this, right? I'm committed. I'm going to do it. And then the faith, the unwavering piece is that most people, even if they like start out that way, as soon as they hit an obstacle, a failure, as we talked about, right? The faith wavers. They're like, oh, never mind. I guess I thought I could do this, but apparently not, right? So the faith goes out the window. The second piece, extraordinary effort. Most people, as soon as the faith goes out the window, the effort follows right behind it, because it's like, well, what's the point of even trying if I don't really believe I can do it? But every person that's created extraordinary results, that's changed the world, that's become, financially free, whatever the result is, they established faith that they could do it. The faith was unwavering, and they put forth extraordinary effort until, and the operative word, underline the word, circle the word until they got there. We're programmed in the past, and we need something in writing to program us based on what we want for our future.
Yeah, that's pretty extraordinary, man. What do you think is like the key trait that you have that has allowed you to be successful, to build this mindset? Like, what's that foundation? Because I know a lot of people, they love what you're saying, dude. They're in, like, they buy into it, but like, it's like they can see the ladder, but they can't reach the bottom rung. Like, what's that like foundational trait that you cultivated in yourself? Is it optimism? Is it something that simple, or?
I'm glad you asked the question, because like, I view myself as a lazy person. I view myself, like, I have so many insecurities. I don't view myself, and I'm like really using affirmations to keep trying to see myself as different. In fact, the other night I had this epiphany. Actually, it was last night. It was last night at the hotel, getting ready for this. I had the epiphany that I go, and I wrote, and anytime I have an epiphany, it goes into like this affirmation app that I use, right? So that I can, again, can't have a thought and go, oh, it's a great idea, and then fall asleep and forget it, So my epiphany was, I still view myself as this 20-something-year-old kid who was trying to make it, who wanted people to accept me, who really loved all people, but felt like I didn't know how to get that across, so people like thought I was a, punk 20-year-old kid or whatever, right? So the point is, right, like, I still deal with all sorts of insecurities, and so I just want, because I saw, is it David Goggins, right? I was watching his interview, and I'm like, this guy's from a different planet. Like, I don't have anywhere close to his discipline or will, So part of it is I've been put in circumstances that I have, it was either like, right, fight or flight. What am I going to do? I've had great mentors that have taught, like, the 5-minute rule and the power of acceptance. That was taught to me when I was 20. My parents, they lost. My sister died when I was 7, or I was 8, and she was a year and a half. And just my mom and my sister at home, and me. And my mom was breastfeeding my baby sister, Amory. And she, all of a sudden, I was across the hall sleeping, and my dad was at work, my sister was out of town, and I heard my mom screaming, my baby, and I'm kind of like coming to, and I thought she was playing with her, like, oh, my baby. Right. And all of a sudden, like, I get clear that, like, the horror in my mom's voice, and I run across the hall into her bedroom, and Amory's dead in her arms.
Whoa.
She had heart failure, and she was born with a really rare condition. My parents, within a matter of, it was less than a year, my mother, devastated, but she founded a support group for parents that had lost children, like under the age of 5 or something, right? So she led that for years. They started a fundraiser to raise money for the hospital that cared for Amory while she was alive. And so I didn't even know it then, but I learned, right, I think it was planted in me that you take adversity, right, and you find the advantage, or you turn it into an advantage, right? Tragedy into triumph. I mean, so I think it's just the conscious choice to and optimism is probably, yeah, I mean, that might be the simple way to put it. Optimism, and then I will throw one other quality in there, which was a chosen, learned quality, which is what really led to the Miracle Morning. The day I came with the Miracle Morning, and it wasn't called that, but I heard a quote from Jim Rohn. And Jim Rohn said, your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development, because success is something you attract by the person you become. And in that moment, I went, dude, I'm not dedicating time every day to my personal development. I'm in survival mode. I just go into my office, I just like work all day, and really not productive. I just spin the wheels, and I'm in fear mode, I'm in scarcity mode, right? And then I do that until I'm exhausted and I go to bed. That's my daily routine. And for a lot of people, I think that's it. You wake up, you deal with life, and then you go to bed, right? And I went, therefore, because I'm not dedicating time every day to my personal development, I'm not becoming the person that I need to be that has the knowledge and the beliefs and the energy and the qualities, the characteristics, the skills, the talent, right, to create the results, the success I want in my life. And that's when I went, I've got to create the most extraordinary personal development ritual in the history of humanity, and I got to start doing it. And that's how the Miracle Morning was born. So the point is this. I believe that that is one of, if not the most fundamental key to success, is that quote, that philosophy from Jim Rohn. And here's the way that I equate it in my head. If we're measuring success on a scale of 1 to 10, in any area of life, I don't just mean, usually success, we think like professional success. I'm talking about your level of success in your relationships as a parent, your level of physical energy, your level of success, in terms of your emotional invincibility rate. On a scale of 1 to 10, what level do we want?
10.
10, right? Nobody's like, I don't want to be too happy. I don't want to be annoying happy. Like, I'll do a 6. Like, I don't want too much money. I don't want family coming out and asking. No, we all want, like, that's one thing we share in common as humans is we aspire. Like, we actually all have it in us. We all want to fulfill our potential. And sadly, most people don't. And I believe that it's because for me, I went, okay, I want level 10 success in every area of my life. But like Jim Rohn is saying, my level of personal development is like at a 2. Maybe a 3 on a good day right now, right? And this is the disconnect. This is what we want in our lives. This is who we are. And that's not a judgment. It's just, right, in terms of our level of personal development. And then my epiphany was, if I dedicate time every day to personal development, I will gradually become a level 3, and then a level 4, and then a level 7. And eventually, if I become a level 10 person in terms of my beliefs and my knowledge and my habits and my skills, I can only help but attract and create and sustain level 10 success in my life. So it's a result of who we become, right? And so I think that is, optimism combined with a relentless dedication, and I know you have it too, and almost any successful person on the planet does, right, to personal development. And it's that idea that if I want to create an extraordinary life, I have to become a level 10 life. I got to become a level 10 person.
I love that. Awesome. Before I ask my last question, tell these guys where they can find you online.
HalElrod.com or miraclemorning.com.
That is awesome. My final question is, what is the impact that you want to have on the world?
Yeah, of course, a beautiful question. And it feels good to have clarity on that. And it changes too, by the way. I always tell people that. So my mission in life is to elevate the consciousness of humanity one morning at a time, one person at a time. And I had it was probably a year ago. We were talking, somebody asked me this question, we were talking about it, a friend, and I had a realization. I go, this is kind of grandiose to say this, but the Miracle Morning literally could lead to world peace. Wow. And the reason I say that, like right now we're working on doing a program in schools where across all grades, from preschool to college, where teachers start every day with the Miracle Morning with their students, right? So they lead them through it's a 6-minute version of 1 minute of affirmations, 1 minute of meditation, 1 minute of exercise, 1 minute of reading, right? Journaling all the way through. And my thought, like, imagine if every student in the world started their day with meditation with those practices. Like, it could end bullying. How are you going to beat up the kid that you just meditated with, and you heard his dreams and his ambitions and his affirmations and so on and so forth? So so I'm seeing it in the community and around the world that really, as it elevates the consciousness of each person each morning, there's a ripple effect that expands out to their world, their families, their communities. CEOs are better leaders for their employees, so on and so forth. So that's the mission that I'm working on.
Damn good mission.
Appreciate
awesome. Hal, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. That was really extraordinary. All right, guys, there are few people in this world who get to show what their leadership is really about because they've been tested. And I think after hearing his story, I think it's very fair to say that he's been tested not once, twice, but 3 times. And
built that mindset by going through those things and really seeing in the trenches what works, what helped, and then bringing that back. I was telling him before we started rolling, the thing that I find so extraordinary about him is in the classic hero's journey, the ending of the story is always the person bringing the lesson back to everybody else and teaching. And that's how I see him. I see him as somebody who is living the hero's journey and really engaging in that final, most amazing piece, which is to share the things that he's learned. And I think as you engage with him, engage with this content, read the book, you're going to see that. You're going to see the profound way in which he's able to really explain things and make it accessible to everybody else so that we can use this stuff in our own lives. I think that what he says is just extraordinarily powerful, and it works, and it's the kind of thing that I've seen countless people in my circle that have achieved just amazing things in their lives. They're all using the elements that he's talking about. So like he says, this really is tried and true stuff that a lot of people are putting to use. His own community, 500,000 people every day wake up and do the miracle morning routine. So check it out. It is something that could be really profound in your life. The affirmations, a lot of this stuff, I just think is unbelievably powerful. So give it a shot. I'd love to hear how it's working for you. I think it's going to serve you well. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Hal, my man. Dude, that was awesome. Hey, Impactivists. I hope you loved that episode. And now I want to take a moment to share with you about our friends at Wix. It is no secret. Wix is an awesome website building platform that lets you create your own amazing site with ease. You may be looking to find a more fulfilling job, start your own business, create a blog, YouTube channel, whatever.
Then what you realize is your capacity to tap into dopamine as a motivator, not just seeking dopamine rewards, that is infinite. And I can say with great certainty that this is how you were able to build a big company and sell it, how you've been able to build a successful podcast and sell it, how you're constantly seeking, because seeking is the reward.
Andrew Huberman, welcome to the show, man.
Great to be here.
I should say Dr. Andrew Huberman,
No.
just so people know what they're about to get. Dude, it's awesome to have you back. Our first interview completely melted my brain. Researching you is one of my favorite things to do. The breadth of topics that you cover is incredible, none more so than the fact that we can get to our mind through our body, which I think is one of the most incredible things. Before we started rolling, though, I had this whole interview planned. I knew exactly where we were going to go. And then you made a comment. I was bringing up Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, as I do because I'm obsessed. And you said, well, there's only one biological currency, and that's dopamine.
That's right.
And I was like, well, now I know where we're starting. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, human beings have evolved tons of technologies and currencies. Bitcoin, Ethereum are not topics I know a lot about. But when you think about dollar, euro, Bitcoin, Ethereum, you think about wins and losses in sport, in life, in relationship, in anything. Something in your brain and body has to keep track of that. Did you win? Did you lose? What's a letdown? What's a celebration? And I think one of the most important findings in the last few years in neuroscience is that while the molecule dopamine is associated with reward, it's more about motivation and craving. There's a really classic experiment now that people use to demonstrate this. You take two rats, and the rats independently, separate cages, can lever press for food. And they can access food. There's a little bit of dopamine that's released anytime they get some food. So we always thought that food, like many other rewards, like food, sex, warmth when you're cold, cool when you're too warm, is triggering the release of dopamine. But someone had the good idea to deplete dopamine in one of those animals. And then what you find is that the animal without dopamine still enjoys food, still enjoys other pleasures. So dopamine's not really involved in the enjoyment of those pleasures. It's involved in motivation, because if you make the animal have to move just one rat's length, believe it or not, to get to that lever, the animal with dopamine will work to go get that thing. It will work through some effort to go get the reward. Whereas the animal, or it turns out the human without much dopamine, can still experience pleasure. They can sit on their couch and cram their face with pleasure-inducing calories or what have you, watch pleasure-inducing things on the television, but they have very little motivation to go pursue things that will deliver them pleasure. So when I say dopamine is the universal currency of everything, what I mean is it's driving the motivation to develop new currencies. When somebody can sit back and say, I'll just throw this number out. Let's say somebody has 100,000 Bitcoins, which presumably now is worth
my
a
God.
good amount, certainly more than it was a few years ago. The way they can register whether or not they are in a position of wealth or not has everything to do with the number they see on the screen or in their Bitcoin wallet. But that number is converted into a chemical signal that has everything to do with how much you had previously. So we could talk about the so-called reward prediction error. How good you feel with an experience has everything to do with how much you had previously. And dopamine itself is what's driving the human species to create these new technologies. And so while we think of currencies as the goal, it's actually what's really driven the forward evolution of our species has been the desire to go seek things beyond the confines of our skin. And when I say the common currency is dopamine, what I mean is the molecule dopamine, when secreted in the brain, makes us pursue things, build things, create things, makes us want new things that we don't currently already have. And so it has a lot of dimensions to it, but rather than think about dopamine as a signal for reward, like a dopamine hit, we classically talk about it, it's more accurate really to think about dopamine as driving motivation and craving to go seek rewards. That's the rat experiment. And it's a way of tabulating where we are in our life. Are we doing well or are we doing poorly? And that happens on very short time scales. Like, do you wake up feeling good? Or do you wake up feeling kind of low? Or on long time scales. If you're halfway through a long degree or you're halfway through your life, how are you doing? How do you gauge that? Well, it has everything to do with how much dopamine you were releasing in the previous days and weeks and years. So you're always comparing it, and all of this is subconscious. But what's cool is that once you make these processes conscious, once you understand a little bit about how dopamine is released and how it changes our perspective and our behavior, then you can actually work with it. So it's one of the instances where knowledge of knowledge actually turns out to be a really useful tool.
Dude, that's crazy to me. So one of the things that I get hit up about all the time is people feel stuck. And as you like really push on them to figure out why they feel stuck, they'll be like, yeah, I want to do that. But I just, I can't get out of bed, or I don't have the energy to pursue it, or whatever. And you get into this common thing that people say in mindset, and I really believe it, but I find it far more interesting when you're talking about it from a neurochemical standpoint, which is you just don't want it badly enough. And when I think about my own life, I sometimes worry that I'm either more malleable than other people, or that I have a greater ability to manipulate my dopamine release or whatever, because I'm very good at building desire. And I like the way that desire feels. Now, when you use the word hunger, I think people get confused, because I actually don't enjoy being hungry for food. I find that totally unpleasurable. However, being hungry for sex, I find incredibly, I feel alive, I feel focused, I feel energized, I feel aggressive. It's complex for sure, but I find that feeling the act of wanting something in the future, in that kind, or in business, and trying to build something. I feel, in fact, that's an interesting insight into my own self about, I like to build. And do we know, dopamine is the neurochemistry of the pursuit of making sure that I have the energy to go. But do we know how we can spike that?
Well, first of all, it's clear to me based on your description that you've tapped into these channels that release dopamine, because craving and wanting, whether or not it's sex or money or connection or anything, all right, that's the primary trigger for dopamine release. Yep. Now, sex and reproduction makes the most sense from the perspective of evolution. Any species, every species tends to have two primary goals. One, protect its young, and second, make more of itself, usually in reverse order, right? So even for people that don't want children, you might not, or people, of course, not everyone is having sex just to reproduce, but at a primordial level, that's what those circuits are there for. So every species, in particular mammalian species where there's a lot of parenting and caretaking of the young, tries to make more of itself. And everything that you see, like maternal aggression, which is a powerful circuit that gets activated after females of any species, in particular mammals, give birth, they will fight to the death, and they gain superhuman strength in order to protect their young. There's a known circuit for that in the brain that gets activated once a female has offspring, and it's robust.
Inside Tracker is offering our listeners 25% off their entire store, including InnerAge 2.0. Just visit InsideTracker.com/Impact Theory. All right, guys, check out Inside Tracker today. Take care and be legendary.
That's so interesting, man. Like, have you read the book The Female Brain?
I have not.
Oh my God. So
I just probably lost a lot of points by
no.
saying that.
But it'll be super interesting because you'll know if she's on the right track from a neuroscience perspective. I remember reading the book. At the time, I thought I was going to have kids. And I remember thinking, whoa, like this book chronicles what happens to a woman's brain and how things change. And I was like, when you have kids, man, you are inviting a neurochemical change in your significant other that is going to play itself out in a very real way. And I'd be lying if I said that wasn't one of the many things, but one of the things that I factored into not having kids.
Interesting.
And then the same with menopause, that it's this really dramatic sort of reorganizing, might not be the right word, but that it has real implications in the way that the person moves, just as the decline of testosterone has in men.
Well, on the positive side, during pregnancy, the woman's hippocampus, her brain area associated with memory and retention of information, it goes through a period in which it gets worse for certain types of information, but then achieves superior levels of working memory once the babies arrive, because there are a lot of things to manage. So this makes sense. This is true in rodents. This is true in humans. And then in terms of the biology of the father, we now know that because typically parents have, it does seem like one spouse always does more than the other. But even in the most evenly divided households, there's usually some co-parenting of some sort, but that the father has a big increase in the hormone prolactin when the mother is expecting. And the prolactin lays down body fat. It prepares for sleepless nights. For women, it sparks the circuitry for milk letdown for nursing. So the dad bod has a lot to do with prolactin. This is true in birds, in small mammals, and in humans. And this has now been, there was a paper published in Nature on humans specifically about this. And when you think about the relationship between dopamine and prolactin, it's interesting, and it takes us back to this motivation and craving that you were describing earlier, which is that dopamine and prolactin work in opposite fashion. So the most salient example of this is sex and reproduction, where anticipation of sex and reproduction greatly increases dopamine, but post-sex, it doesn't have to be for reproduction, there's a spark in prolactin in the male. The spike, in prolactin. And that spike in prolactin is actually what sets the refractory period during which he can't mate again. So it sets a period of quiescence to keep men, it's for pair bonding, for the exchange of chemicals through the nose, through the skin, and through the sweat, mainly through odor. We could talk about pheromones if you want, but that's a topic that's somewhat controversial. The actual identity of pheromones in humans has not been identified, but there are pheromone effects in humans.
It's controversial in that people don't agree what's really happening.
Well, okay, so there's this culture of biologists that have clearly identified pheromone effects in non-humans and non-human primates. But whether or not those are, the classic definition of a pheromone effect is that it's subconscious, that you can't actually detect the smell. However, we know that smells themselves, conscious detection of them, can evoke very robust physiological responses. One example, to just stay in this arena of thought, is that a guy by the name of Noam Sobel, who's at the Weizmann Institute, he used to be at Berkeley, he has a lab over in Israel, it's an amazing lab, works on olfaction, smell, and he discovered that the scent of women's tears causes a dramatic and significant reduction in testosterone in men.
What?
Absolutely. And this was published, if anyone wants to go look it up, it was published in Science magazine.
You can smell tears?
Yeah, we have, the Super Bowl of publishing in science is Science, Nature, and Cell. Those are the three top journals. This is published in Science magazine, very stringent. The smell of tears. Now, it's subconscious at some level. Whoa. But the other thing that, if we were going to kind of play around in this hormones and behavior interactions between humans, there are some really interesting examples. So, for instance, men will rate the smell of a woman's skin or sweat or the perception of her face as more beautiful during the pre-ovulatory phase of her menstrual cycle. That pre-ovulatory phase is associated with a number of different changes in hormones, okay? just that smell will increase testosterone in a male. And oral contraception in the female, when women taking oral contraception, it adjusts their hormones such that men no longer detect this change in how attractive women are. Doesn't mean they find them unattractive, but it means they don't find them increasingly attractive during this certain period of their menstrual cycle. So we are constantly signaling back and forth through hormones. In fact, we met over there and shook hands because we've been tested for COVID and the rest. We shook hands, and what happened and what happens within 30 seconds of any human being contacting one another is they shake hands and then they wipe the chemicals of the other person on their face or body. Noam's lab has also shown this. And so we are constantly signaling through chemical exchange. Sometimes it's subconscious, and those are the so-called pheromone effects. Sometimes it's low levels of odors that are beneath our conscious detection. And sometimes it's outright, wow, this person smells really, really good. Or they look particularly good today. Oftentimes that's tied to the period in which they're ovulating in their menstrual cycle.
So I want to plant a flag here about all the things that we do that are messing with these mechanisms, like cologne or deodorant.
Or oral contraception, of which I'm not saying is...
Pornography,
yeah,
like
and oral
all of this
contraception
stuff.
has served a great role in for certain people. Some people might say this is an ethical discussion. Is it good, is it bad? But either way, it is having an effect.
Right.
So I only look at things through the lens of biology, not through the lens of whether or not we should or shouldn't do things.
Facts. I love it. Okay, so we're planting that flag. We're
Yeah.
coming back to it. But now I want to get to how do we spike intentionally?
Right.
You've talked about we can spike testosterone, but I want to know, can we spike dopamine?
Yeah, so, and you've done this. So your example of craving is actually what you crave. You crave the feeling of craving is beautiful because what it means is that you don't allow yourself to go so far down the arc of the dopamine trajectory to get to the other source of motivation. So there are two sources of motivation as it relates to dopamine, and then we can think about tools that we could export from these that are nested in neurobiology. The first is to do what you do, which is to be able to sense the craving as its own form of pleasure. This has kind of remnants of Carol Dweck's growth mindset that you eventually develop a pleasure in the seeking and the striving. Has has flavors of a David Goggins type approach where it seems like he gets pleasure from the friction itself. And so there are elements of that. You seem to have that as well. But if you can start to identify the craving as its own internally released drug, this thing dopamine, that is a source of motivation, then what you realize is that capturing the reward is wonderful, but attaching dopamine to the reward is actually a little bit dangerous.
Attaching.
Yeah,
This is
celebrating the win more than the pursuit, it actually sets you up for failure in the future. And so this gets us right into something called dopamine reward prediction error. And reward prediction error is basically if you expect something to be really great, and then it's not quite that great, your dopamine baseline lowers. And now understanding what we know about dopamine, that means that not only did you feel as if you lost because it wasn't as much a celebration as you thought it would be, but it also means that you're starting from a lower place, meaning you are less motivated. Now, the simpler way to conceptualize this is I have a colleague at Stanford. She runs the addiction dual diagnosis clinic. Her name is Dr. Anna Lemke. She has a book called Dopamine Nation that's out right now. And she's really described this pleasure-pain balance, where anytime you have a bunch of dopamine and you're in pursuit, after you achieve a win, now this could be a business win, a relationship, a win of any kind, but inevitably there's going to be a tipping back of the scale on the pain side. And that pain side is always going to go a little bit higher than the dopamine side. So this is what you would feel if you pursued a goal like building a big company. Here it comes, the big sale. And then there's the, well, what now? The kind of letdown. Now, if you simply wait and stop pursuing dopamine for a short while, the scale starts to reset. The problem is a lot of people immediately roll right into the next pursuit. And then what happens is that scale starts to get stuck on the pain side. A little bit more. And pretty soon, no amount of seeking will allow you to experience that craving and motivation. So what does this mean in terms of an actual tool? Well, first of all, if people can do what you do, they're going to be in a much better position in life. Doesn't matter if it's school, sport, relationship, any domain of life. If you can start to register, that craving and that friction and that desire, that almost kind of low level of agitation, sometimes high level of agitation, that is that I'm trying to impose my will on the world in a benevolent way, we hope, that's dopamine. It's working with its close cousin, which is epinephrine, which is adrenaline. They are very close cousins. In fact, dopamine manufactures epinephrine. A lot of people don't know this, but adrenaline is actually made from the molecule dopamine. Okay, so those two are hanging out together. It's like crave work, crave work, crave and work, crave and work, crave and work. And then you get the win. And some people allow the big peak in dopamine to be associated with the win. And smart people learn to adjust their celebration internally, right? This is all internal. You could throw the biggest party in the world, but as long as you're kind of laid back and looking at this, not letting yourself get manic crazy, you won't necessarily crash as hard, and pretty soon your system will reset. So that you take the day, you clean up the dishes, you relax, you go, what now? I'm feeling a little low. Well, rather than going out and spiking your dopamine again, just wait. Understand that the scale will reset again. Give yourself a few days where you're going to feel a little kind of underwhelmed. Things aren't going to be as interesting. It's going to be hard to trigger that big release because you just had the peak. Well, if you adjust that, you relax, you understand there's always a little bit of a postpartum depression. We sometimes hear about postpartum depression. That's a clinical thing, but there's always that kind of, today's not as exciting as the previous days. What am I going to do with my life? But then if you let it start ratcheting up again, then what you realize is your capacity to tap into dopamine as a motivator, not just seeking dopamine rewards, that is infinite. And I can say with great certainty that this is how you were able to build a big company and sell it, how you've been able to build a successful podcast and sell it, how you're constantly seeking, because seeking is the reward. And I think for most people, we think of the reward as the finish line. And so the key is to get to the finish line, step into the end zone, but no end zone dance. It's just like, yep, and now I'm going to go do it again. That's really the key. That's the key to doing it over and over. And when I see big athletes or academics or anyone or musicians and they rise and crash, it's clear they've lost the touch with the motivation evoked dopamine. And they've lost touch probably because it hasn't really been described by the neuroscience community until Anna has started talking about this stuff publicly, and I'm echoing what she's beautifully said much better than I am, which is that you should always expect that after a bunch of pleasure, there's going to be that low and then that craving. How do I get back to there again? And the key is you have to walk the staircase again. You don't get to do this as a square wave pull. You don't get to just ascend. It's always up, down, up a little bit higher, down, up, that's the function. So I don't know if that resonates with your experience.
I'm over here freaking out. So you've literally just explained what I will say is the single most important loop if you want to be successful. And you used words, attach, right? You had another one which was about I forget the exact word, but you're inserting yourself consciously into the process. Because what I learned very early on, and I'm so grateful, in the same way that you are grateful that your upbringing wasn't perfect, but it ended up giving you a frame of reference and insights that have propelled you forward, I'm very grateful that I spent a decade just trying to get rich. It was the stated mission. I would say it every day. Like, I'm here to get rich. I show up to work to get rich. It's about getting rich. And it didn't work. And my wife pulls me aside and she's like, you're now damaging the marriage. Like, you're just so fiendishly focused on the goal that there's nothing as integrated in your life. You're doing something you hate for an end state that may never come. And that was so profound, and it shook me so deeply, and it suddenly became clear that from a neurological perspective, what I wanted was to feel alive. And once I put everything in the pursuit, I'm just interested in, can I show up every day and sincerely pursue this thing, which I may never get, but I'm gonna honor myself, celebrate myself, big up myself, as the Brits would say, for just showing up today and actually trying to make it happen. And one, that's way more sustainable. And then two, you don't get tricked into thinking that, oh, when I get this thing that I'll feel good, because it's the craving that makes me feel alive. So it's the state of wanting that is in and of itself the pleasurable act.
That's right.
And so I began to use the metaphor of, I'm going to climb this mountain only to want the next mountain to climb. And Once I knew that, well, then you have to be totally comfortable dropping back down and starting all over. Now, the interesting thing, and I don't know if I'm fooling myself or if I have so integrated that trick, but the come down isn't hard for me. So I think my last day at Quest was a Monday, and Tuesday I started Impact Theory. And so that went from, I had 3,000 employees, your position matters, you get a lot of deference, you've got a privileged parking space. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of things that go into it. But none of like my reward system was tied to that. So it was very easy for me to start the next day with, there was only 7 of us and no one had time for any deference of any kind. And I went from having an EA, which you can't imagine how amazing that is, to not, and you're doing everything for yourself again. But that wasn't a painful thing because I was so focused on, all right, cool, this is step 1 again, and now can we repeat?
Well, it helps if you can expect that there will be a little bit of a dip post-win or post-whatever. That's helpful. There's always a refractory period of any kind, so to speak. If you expect it, that's great because you eliminate the downside of the reward prediction error. Reward prediction error can also be conceptualized as, I tell you we're going to go to this restaurant, I keep building up the food. I actually raise the expectation and the requirement that that food be really spectacular. Better off I just tell you it's going to be pretty good and then you're wowed by it, right? Because if your dopamine was higher in anticipation than the actual food evoked, well then it makes sense why you're always integrating over the dopamine release you had previously. Now, there are a couple of things that you said in there that I want to highlight, which I find so interesting, and we can get a little bit Eastern philosophy, mystical here, but tie it back to some real neuroscience, which is, you said, that's the juice, the motivation is the juice. If you look at Eastern philosophy and they talk about chi, and this, what is that? I wager that is dopamine. The desire to pursue things and to create more of oneself and as a species, whether or not you decide to have kids or not, those circuits all use the one universal currency, dopamine, of wanting more things that are outside the confines of your skin. And that's what's driven forward evolution of individuals and families and cultures and our species as a whole. And again, the circuitry has been there for many, many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And so it's highly conserved. And so what that means is that it doesn't matter if it's Bitcoin or Ethereum. It doesn't matter if it's putting rockets on other planets. It doesn't matter if it's building the first automobile. It's the same currency. So understanding those cycles is really key. The other thing is the element of pain. I think that understanding that pain and pleasure are in this really dynamic balance can also help us, which in the following way. Any pain that you feel, the longer day, the less sleep, the kind of agony that things aren't working, that power outlet doesn't work, or the internet is slow, whatever it is, the amount of pleasure that you will eventually experience is directly related, to how much pain you experience. So we know this from actually what nowadays would be considered quite barbaric and unethical experiments where they would give people electrical shocks and they would measure their response. And then they'd say, we're going to increase it. Eventually they get to the point where a shock that was previously very painful actually evokes a sense of pleasure. Now, you couldn't do these experiments anymore. These are not the experiments I do in my lab. These are older experiments. But for instance, and this has been discussed in scientific research papers, giving somebody a 10-minute ice bath, for instance, or even a 3-minute ice bath, or a 1-minute ice bath is quite painful. But there was a study from the University of Prague, European Journal of Physiology, showed that after a painful ice bath stimulus, the amount of dopamine release goes up for 2.5 hours to 250% above baseline. And that's not because the ice bath itself evokes dopamine release. A lot of people think, oh, cold water evokes dopamine release. No, pain evokes dopamine release after the pain is over. Yesterday, I tweaked my back because I do this stupid thing every few years, the same stupid thing, and it's really painful. And then you just remember all the ways in which you can't move around. I was like standing up this morning, I'm like, and just walking is so painful. As the pain has started to dissipate, you get a little bit of a high, right? You get a little bit of a euphoria. That's dopamine because of the degree of pain that you experienced previously predicts how much pleasure. So when you start a company down in the dregs and you're shoveling again, that's beautiful because that means that the win that you achieve is going to be as good or greater than the one you had previously, in your case with Quest. And so we go back to this example of the person that's not motivated, that can't get off the couch, that doesn't want to do anything. Well, this is the problem. we remember the rat experiment? They are effectively the rat with no dopamine, but they can still achieve some sense of pleasure by consuming excess calories, by consuming social media. And look, I'm not judging, I do this stuff too, right? Scrolling social media. If you've ever scrolled social media and you're like, I don't even know why I'm doing this, it doesn't really feel that good. And I can remember a time where you'd see something that was just so cool, or you'd see something online. I remember this when TED Talks first came out. I was like, this is amazing. These are some, at least some of them are really smart people sharing really cool insights. And then now that there are like a gazillion TED Talks, I remember spending a winter in my office when I was a junior professor, cleaning my office finally, and binging TED Talks in the background, thinking this is a good use of my time. Pretty soon, they all sucked to me. I was like, this isn't good. So what you need to do is stop watching TED Talks for a while, wait, and then they become interesting again. And that's this pain-pleasure balance. And so for people that aren't feeling motivated, the problem is they're not motivated, but they're getting just enough or excess sustenance. So they're getting the little mild hits of opioid, it becomes an opioid system. And if you think about the opioid drugs as opposed to dopaminergic drugs make people rabid for everything. You know, drugs of abuse like cocaine and amphetamine make people incredibly outward directed, right? They hardly notice anything except what they want more of, more. It's bad because those drugs trigger so much dopamine release that they become the reward. It's very circular. Only the drug can give that much dopamine. Nothing they could pursue would give them as much dopamine as the drug itself. So there's that. And then there's the kind of opioid-like effects of constantly indulging oneself with social media or with video games or with food or with anything to the point where it no longer evokes the motivation and craving. And this is really the new evolution of the understanding of dopamine in neuroscience, which is that dopamine itself is not the reward. It's the buildup to the reward. And the reward has more of a kind of opioid bliss-like property, which itself is not bad if it's endogenous, released from within. But when we can just sit there like the rat with no dopamine, gorging ourselves with pleasures, so to speak, what you end up with is somebody that feels really unmotivated, and those pleasures no longer work to tickle those feel-good circuits. And so there's no reason for them to go out and pursue anything. And that's a pretty dark picture. So the keys are to pursue rewards, but understand that the pursuit is actually the reward if you want to have repeated wins, okay? The celebration has to be less than the pursuit. And that's hard for some people to do. It's got to be that your celebration is slightly less dopaminergic. It can be very reflective. You can be in gratitude. Those are other neurotransmitter systems, but you don't want to be on that high as you celebrate the win. You want to be trickling out your dopamine regularly until you pursue things. And then just understand there will always be a crash of pain. And the more pain you experience, the more dopamine you can achieve if you get back on the avenue of pursuit.
What's up, everybody? It is time to figure out how to restart your health plan in 2021 by taking control of all the key data that can help you achieve your health goals. You don't need to chase after wellness trends when instead you can have a personalized fitness and nutrition plan designed for what your body needs. Inside Tracker cuts through the noise by analyzing your lifestyle, blood, DNA, and fitness trackers to provide you with a personalized, science-backed, trackable action plan on how to live, age, and perform better. Inside Tracker was founded by leading scientists in aging, genetics, and biometric data from MIT, Tufts, and Harvard. Using their patented algorithm, they can analyze your body's data and offer you a clearer picture than you've ever had before of what exactly is going on inside you. One of our Impact Theory team members shared his blood test results with Inside Tracker. He was able to get a detailed analysis of what foods he should incorporate into his diet and how he can improve his daily exercise routine. And now he has actionable steps that he can track via the Inside Tracker app on his phone. It's all based on science and specific to you. InnerAge is Inside Tracker's ultra-personalized nutrition system focused on improving your health span. Their advanced data-driven model first calculates your true biological age and then creates a science-backed action plan designed to help you live a longer, healthier life. You can take control of your fitness and nutrition plan in 2021 with Inside Tracker. For a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering our listeners 25% off their entire store, including InnerAge 2.0. Just visit insidetracker.com/impacttheory.
Once again, for a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering our listeners 25% off their entire store, including InnerAge 2.0. Just visit insidetracker.com/impact theory. All right, guys, check out Inside Tracker today. Take care and be legendary. Yeah, this gets into unintended consequences of modernity. And so we're living through this time where we, going back to that flag that we planted of these unintended consequences of, oh, I can make myself smell good. Oh, I can, watch the coolest video. Oh, like TikTok. Dude, I don't have an addictive personality. That's the first thing where I'll lose an hour and be like, what the fuck did I just do?
Well, that's the problem is not pleasures. The problem is that pleasure experienced without prior requirement for pursuit is terrible for us. It's terrible for us as individuals. It's terrible for us as groups. And I have great confidence in the human species to work this out. But we are finding now, and we are going to increasingly find, that those who will be successful, young or old, are going to be those people who can create their own internal buffers. They're going to be able to control their relationship to pleasures, because the proximity to pleasures and their availability is the problem. If you look at the increase in use of drugs of abuse or prescription medication, which at least at the first pass deliver pleasure, pain relief, the whole issue with the opioid crisis, and dopaminergic drugs like Ritalin, Adderall, there sometimes is a clinical need, but tons of people are taking those recreationally now or to study. Huge dopamine increases are what those cause. That is a problem. That's a serious problem, because it creates a cycle where you need more of that specific thing. I would say addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure.
God, that's such a good definition.
And, and I don't like to comment too much on enlightenment because, I don't really know what that is as a neurobiologist, but a good life, we could say, is a progressive expansion of the things that bring you pleasure. And even better, is a good life is a progressive expansion of the things that bring you pleasure and includes pleasure through motivation and hard work. And understanding this pain-pleasure balance, whereby if you experience pain and you can continue to be in that friction and exert effort, the rewards are that much greater when they arrive. And so I think that if you look at any drug of abuse or any situation where somebody isn't motivated or thinks now they may have clinically diagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but a lot of what people think is ADHD, it turns out, is people just over-consuming dopamine from various sources. And also the context within a TikTok feed is, the context switch is insane. The brain has never seen, first of all, this is the first time in human evolution that we wrote with our thumbs, but that's a pretty benign shift. And then the other shift is, normally you walk from one room to another, or from a field into the trees, or from a hut or a house, or whatever it is. But now you can get 10,000 context switches in that 30 minutes of scrolling on Instagram or TikTok. And so it's all about self-regulation. We are going to select for the people that can self-regulate. And so then people say, well, how do you self-regulate? How do kids self-regulate? Well, this is my hope, and one of the reasons I've gotten excited about public education and teaching neuroscience is that this is a place where knowledge of knowledge actually can allow oneself to intervene. When you think, I'm feeling low, I don't feel good, nothing really feels like good. Am I depressed? Maybe. But maybe you've saturated the dopamine circuits. You're now in the pain part of things. What do? Well, you have to stop. You need to replenish dopamine. You need to stop engaging with this behavior, and then your pleasure for it will come back. But you have to constantly control the hinge. It's not just about being back and forth on the seesaw. You have to make sure the hinge doesn't get stuck in pain or in pleasure. So it's a dynamic process being a human being. It's not easy. And remember, these circuits didn't evolve for this purpose. They evolved primarily for making more of ourselves. That's why they're so closely tied to the reproductive circuits. And that's why it was interesting and very relevant that you said that your desire to have sex with your wife is one of the most powerful feelings. And it kind of, from a neurochemical perspective, it wicks out into all these other pursuits, right? Those other pursuits aren't about sex per se, but it's the same molecule. So the feeling is the same. It's just that for some people, the amplitude of that dopamine signal for craving sex is very high. For some people, that's lower, and it's higher for video games. Whatever you lean into and you think about often in these pursuits will start to reshape these circuits, because these dopaminergic circuits are tied to everything. There are examples of people getting addicted to the most incredible things. There are also examples of people getting very good but not addicted to chess, for instance. it's all the same general set of mechanisms.
Yeah, you talked earlier about the knowledge of knowledge, and that was the big breakthrough for me at the darkest period of my life. I happened to grab a book. We talked about this briefly in our first interview. I happened to grab a book that talked about neuroplasticity, and they were hypothesizing maybe this is a thing, and that gave me hope because I could imagine what was going on in my brain. And once I can visualize it, then I feel like I can insert myself into it. It's why I've gotten so interested in health, why I'm so interested in neuroscience, is for me, if I were sliding towards depression, I would do exactly what you're saying. I would assess that and be like, okay, wait a second. I know that I can insert conscious control. I know that this is a biological experience. And I'm obsessed with that idea that you're having a biological experience. And to me, like there's some people that see the way the magic trick is done and it loses the magic. Then for other people, it's like you see that this is somebody that's spent 30,000 hours learning how to move their hands so that you don't notice that they just move the coin, from this hand to this hand. It blows me away.
I love magic. Before the pandemic, a friend took me up to the Magic Castle here in Hollywood, and there's some incredible stuff going on. Magic is actually really cool. We could, just as from a neuroscience perspective, magic, it's all about creating gaps in your perception. That's obvious, right? And when that happens, because the brain is so accustomed to the laws of physics, like objects fall down, not up, etc., when that happens, it clearly triggers the surprise circuitry. And that itself, that feeling of delight and surprise, is absolutely tied also to these dopamine circuits.
It's interesting, though, that doesn't send us into like terror. Like the people
Well,
don't shriek and
it depends on the magic trick. When I went there was this crazy trick that the guy did. He took out cards, and I was invited up to sit next to him. I signed my name on a card. Mm-hmm. I took the card. I tore it up. I put it in my pocket. And at the end of the show, we went through a series of things. At the end of the show, he took off his shoe and presented the card to me with the signature intact and the card intact. And that was my signature. So he clearly created gaps of perception. But at some point as adults, so I think as long as we know the context is right, then we can do this. One thing about dopamine that I just want to make sure I mention, and based on something you said earlier, is that one interesting question about the brain is just asking the question, how do we segment time? How do you know that this podcast obviously has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but how do we segment time? And so there have been some beautiful experiments done recently showing that, for instance, if you're watching a sports game, regardless of whether or not your team scores, like let's say basketball goes down court, let's say they miss the three-pointer and then it's a close game, there's a little blip of dopamine that says that was one segment of time. And so dopamine is a big way in which we segment time. The other way are blinks. Believe it or not, yeah, that every time we blink, this is a paper published in Current Biology, every time we blink, we reset our perception of time.
That one I understand more, I guess, than the dopamine. Why would dopamine be involved in time?
Perfect question. Turns out that the frequency of blinking is set by the baseline level of dopamine in the brain. Yes. So when people are wide-eyed with excitement and they're not blinking very often, or someone is on a drug that kicks out a lot of dopamine, they hardly ever blink. Their pupils are huge. They're actually not segmenting time in a normal fashion.
Whoa.
And so much of your life, in retrospect, is segmented by those peaks in dopamine. Those mark key events in your life. When you met your wife, all the segments of your life are noted by peaks in dopamine or the way that you happen to conceptualize dopamine. And so also people who are depressed are often very focused on the past. Naturally, they default to ruminating on the past. When you adjust people's dopamine levels to healthy levels, they start becoming more forward-thinking and more present. And so there's this relationship between blinking and time perception, dopamine and blinking. How you conceptualize time has a lot to do with these peaks in dopamine and when they occur. And this is a big deal because 2020 was a rough year for most people. 2021's feeling a little better, but we don't really know where we are in this whole arc of everything that's happening. There's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
The dopamine peaks and the frequency of those dopamine peaks have everything to do with how we carve up our experience of time. And anyone who spent a lot of time in deep meditation starts to develop a kind of intuitive internal representation of the fact that time is very fluid in this way. And when we say time is fluid, what we mean is the secretion of dopamine in these pulses is very fluid. They are under control of what's happening externally, but also how you conceptualize your life. Like, where are you in your life? Hopefully if David Sinclair has his way, and hopefully he will, we will all live to be, more than 100 years old, hopefully in good vitality. So this is the more esoteric aspect of dopamine.
Real fast, before we move off the time thing,
Yeah.
let me ask you. So there was a period in my life, I'll peg it at about 2 years, where for whatever reason, it could have been 6 hours since I last looked at a clock. I would be within 3 minutes of what time it was. And my wife found it hilarious, and so she'd be like, "What time is it?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's 4:58."
It's
She'd
like
look at
Crocodile
it.
Dundee, just
It
look at the
was
sun.
so weird that it like made my radar is like, "Oh my God, I have like this special power." And then it went away. And now I can probably get you within 15 minutes, but like, it was really eerie. Does that make a prediction or around like a consistency of dopamine release or something?
Yeah, you nailed it. It's the consistency. It's an interval timer, as we say. So when people's dopamine is low, they tend to overestimate. Okay. And when people's dopamine is high, they tend to underestimate time. Now, it is true that dopamine, when it's released, is a little bit of a stimulant in the system because of the way it works with epinephrine. How finely you slice time is very dependent on dopamine and your internal level of autonomic arousal. A really good example would be you're really excited about something or you're really stressed about something, doesn't matter. Dopamine is elevated in excitement, but epinephrine tend to be elevated anytime we're agitated or excited. Just imagine you need to catch a flight, you're in line at the security, and the person in front of you seems like they're going really, really slowly. Your frame rate is faster. You're just carving up time more finely. People who are in car accidents and then they report everything being in slow motion, your frame rate is smaller. You're essentially you're taking larger time bins. And this is why, let's say you wake up and you're really tired or you're kind of out of it and you look and it's like text messages and emails and all this stuff. The world seems like it's going by really, really fast. Dopamine is the dynamic process dopamine release, I should say, is the dynamic process by which you adjust time perception. So if you had a very keen perception of the passage of time, right down to the minute or so, that suggests very regular intervals of dopamine release. And that's probably tied to outside events that are below your conscious awareness. But dopamine releases, I sort of, not to make this PG-13 or R-rated, but if we go back to the example of sex and sleep are the two times when space and time have a very fluid type relationship. It's very hard to conceive space and time in sleep. That's actually the nature of sleep, is we do the long blink, no joke. We close the shutters, stop bringing in external information. And in sleep, space and time are very fluid, right? Things can happen very fast or very slow motion. You can be flying. There's a lot of, some of it is dreaming, but space and time are very fluid. In wakefulness, space and time are very anchored by physical events in the world, but our perception of those is dynamically regulated by how much dopamine is in our system. So it's beginning to sound like dopamine does everything, but it's really associated with motivation, craving, and time interval keeping. And so I would be willing to bet that your pulses of dopamine were very regular, just like drops. Plop, plop, plop.
So interesting. So we do a lot of things. Who knows what I was doing at that period, if it had to do anything, just that I'm getting older, and so it starts to disrupt itself. Who knows? But what are some things? So one thing I've heard you talk about, which I find really interesting, when I think about all the things that we're doing that are disrupting things, all these unintended consequences of modern behavior, I am truly glad that cell phones, the internet, and pornography did not exist when I was younger, because I don't know if at 14 I could have been disciplined enough if I had access to that. And when you think about the things that we're doing right now that are sort of that have maybe the most grand unintended consequences, where do you land?
Yeah, on the time scale of 24 hours, one of the huge mistakes that we all make, and I've said this many times, so if people have heard me say this before, forgive me, but it turns out it's still true. Getting too much bright light exposure from the hours of 10 p.m. until 4 a.m., unless you have to work shift work, which is a unique case, that bright light exposure between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., even if you adjust the colors of the lights, you still need to get everything really, really dim, because it actually blocks the release of dopamine through a pathway that involves a structure called the habenula. The habenula was a kind of cryptic structure in the brain for a long time, but now we know there's a punishment signal in the brain. You get neurochemically punished for viewing bright light at those hours.
Why? How would that be wired in? We'd never be able to expose ourselves to bright light.
So that's a great question. So firelight won't do that. Moonlight's fine. Candles, lights that are dim or
How
low in
would
your
we
environment.
develop that?
So the pathway to the habenula and then to these dopamine reducing circuits are the pain pathway that we were referring to earlier. It's a generic pathway through which lots of different types of signals and stimuli and events can punish us internally.
Fuck, this is so good, dude. And so I'm going to call this the rich kid effect. Like there, and you mentioned hard work earlier. There is a reason I think that children of wealthy parents end up imploding, because there is an evolutionary, the punishment pathway, evolutionary thing that's going on that says you didn't have to work hard for the things that you own, and because from I need you to go hunt and gather and face a saber-toothed tiger, I have to reward you for doing hard things and punish you for not doing hard things.
Well, and you know, in the case of the generic model of the spoiled rich kid, they actually can't access dopamine. Remember that movie from the 80s? It was it was called like The Toy or something with Richard Pryor.
I was like, if this motherfucker says toy, I'm gonna have a seizure. Yes, I remember
so,
it. God.
Richard Pryor in that movie, and the kid has everything, and he's the epitome of the spoiled brat. All the toys, all the cars, all the things. Now we see this with people who actually go from rags to riches and then bathe in all the luxuries they didn't have as a child. These are often the athletes that don't go on to perform well again. These are people that crash because of other dopamine-seeking behaviors. You know, I'm not going to call out names, but there are far too many examples of these. And I don't call out names mostly because we are all capable of this. We all would like to think that, oh, if I had all that money or if I had all that success, I would really be a good human being and I wouldn't do those things. Any human being that is immersed in these dopamine circuits too much, or who gets too much pleasure without having to pursue it first and really work and actually experience pain, pleasure, ratcheting back and forth along that climb, because it wasn't just dopamine like this for you. It was probably pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, right? They're always proportional to one another. So anyone that does that, it has a tremendously hard time accessing pleasure. They can't do that. And we often think about the extremes of addiction, and those are really severe. But we also have to think about the more subtle forms of something we really love, but indulging in it just a little too often so that it no longer has that edge. You know, there have been really good studies of people who jump out of airplanes with parachutes. You know, I'm sure it's a lot of fun. It looks like a thrill. But people do it over and over and over again, often die doing other things. They often become drug addicts because it's a huge high. Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of that.
Interesting.
And, you know, there are a lot of examples of this. I mean, you can get addicted to anything. The key is to regulate that behavior. So you asked what should people do? Well, certainly I'm trying this now, and I have some good examples. Some young people I know and work with are taking breaks from not just social media, but no cell phone whatsoever. I'm actually trying an odd experiment, which is for the first hour of every day, no phone. Mostly because I think...
part of your 25 no-goes?
Yes, I have
day?
a bunch
I find
of
this
no-goes.
really interesting.
Right, so we have circuitry in the brain related to the so-called basal ganglia, and we have goes, sort of activating, you know, think gas pedal, and then there's a lot of no-go circuitry. And learning how to keep that no-go, don't circuitry, as we could call it, tuned up is very important. And so many times throughout the day, but I try and get 25 a day, where I actively refrain from doing something that I impulsively want to do. Could be looking at my phone, but it could even be something trivial. Like I want to walk to the kitchen and get a glass of water. So I'm actively engaging in in denial, not cognitive denial, probably that too, but how would I know? But in action-based denial. So restricting my behavior in some way as a way of keeping these dopamine circuits tuned up. Also not looking at my phone first thing in the morning for an hour, because knowing what we now know about the second phase of sleep and REM sleep being more predominant in the second wave of sleep, and the fact that you're working through a lot of emotional and logistical contingencies, you're reshaping your brain in sleep. That's when neuroplasticity occurs, during sleep. It's triggered in wakefulness, but it actually takes place in sleep, especially that second half of sleep. When you wake up in the morning, you are in a perfect position to what I call receive the download of all the work that your neural circuitry has been doing the night before. But if you immediately go to a sensory experience, especially a rich sensory experience of stuff scrolling by, you're actually missing the information that you processed at night. And even more importantly, that second half of the night during REM sleep is when the emotional weight of things becomes, let's say, you put it on the shelf properly. Things that are important to emotionally register get put in one shelf. Things that were like the comment you got on Twitter that was triggering doesn't seem like such a big deal after a good night's sleep. And that's because that second half of sleep is actually when you re-experience these things, but your body can't secrete adrenaline. It's kind of an internal form of therapy or even trauma therapy. And that's why people who don't get that sleep are very, they're easily agitated. They feel like the world is crushing down on them. So when I wake up in the morning, I want to receive ideas that I want to learn from my learning. And if you take in new information, you are not in a position to do that. And 60 minutes is a tough one. So I give myself 2 no-goes for the 60-minute block if I can do it. And I'll tell you, a lot of mornings I fail, Tom. I don't do it.
Interesting.
I make it a
found that
30-minute,
shocking, but I heard you say that in another interview, and I was like,
well, I mean, I'm human. There are mornings where I get enticed, or worse, I find myself reflexively picking up the phone without having made the conscious decision. And that's when I realize that, we are all deep in this process. And I think we have to regulate it. The experiment I'd like to do, maybe you'll do this with me as a challenge, because a challenge is always good, is in the new year, I actually want to take every odd waking hour of the day off the phone. So even hours of the day, as long as it's waking, I'm willing to have it on and work with it. But odd hours, just turn it off no matter what. I don't know if this will destroy most of the relationships in my life, but just to see, can I do it on a rigidly externally imposed schedule? Because if you think about most of the growth in life comes from these rigidly externally imposed schedules, and we hate them. But they are where we learn restraint.
dude, this is so important. I don't know if I hate them anymore. So people will often ask, like, how I do this, that, or the other, whatever it is. Like, Tom, how do you, so I work 93 hours a week. That's like my average.
That's your average?
So, Tom, why do you work 93 hours every week? And the answer is because 93 are joyful and 94 wouldn't. And when I start working more than that, it usually means that I'm juggling so many things that my brain seems to be using sleep as a way to track some of them or something.
Yeah.
So I find myself waking up a lot. Now, I have a trick that allows me to fall back asleep very fast, but it's still not as restful as just sleeping through the night.
What's the trick, if you don't mind me interrupting?
I don't at all. So I have 2 pairs of AirPod headphones, and I put them in, and I put them on a fiction book, and I turn the volume down such that if I don't put a little bit of pressure on my ear, I can't make out what they're saying. So as soon as I drift off, the pressure releases, and I can still hear that noise is being made, but I can't track it, and so I'm usually out probably in about 3 minutes.
Wow.
That changed my life in terms of when I get stressed, I can still fall back asleep.
Such a great skill. And just reflecting on what you use, that murmur in the background, and this kind of low level, I can't quite detect it, is actually the way that your brain detects things as you're falling asleep. So I wonder if you've triggered your circuit to run in reverse, where you actually can send yourself back under.
What it makes me think is that I can't process the problems and listen to a story at the same time. And so my brain clicks over into story mode and is like, oh, we're digesting this story. I'm getting input, so because I'm getting input, because it's story, my brain lets go of I have to solve problems, and then that allows me to fall right back asleep.
That's great. Such a great skill. And waking up in the middle of the night from time to time to use the bathroom is actually quite normal. And some people are really obsessed by the fact, oh no, I woke up, and then they get triggered. But I learned this last year that the peak in our alertness is actually about 90 minutes before our natural bedtime. And a lot of people, they reach the point in the evening where they're ready to go to sleep, and then they feel all this, excitement and surge of energy, and they think, oh no, I'm not going to be able to fall asleep. But that's actually a natural surge that's followed by a dip. A lot of people also have the trouble of waking up in the middle of the night and wondering why they can't fall back asleep. This is dreadfully hard for a lot of people.
I struggled that for years.
Yeah, and one of the solutions is to go to bed earlier, because it means that your melatonin is starting to get released early in the evening. And so we all have the natural ability to push to stay up later if we really need to. This has obvious adaptive utility. But some people who should go to bed, quote unquote, should go to bed at 9 or 10 p.m., they're pushing to 11 or 12, and then their melatonin signal is starting to drop off. Now they can't fall asleep, or they're waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and they're in trouble. But it sounds like you hit the right schedule. 93 hours is an impressive output.
Yeah, that's a lot of years of making an obscene amount of mistakes. And to close the loop on, so people, how do you accomplish X, Y, Z? And the answer is partly rules. So you have to be obsessed with your goal, right? So for me, that's all obsessions start with a goal. What do you want? Is that thing exciting and honorable? Assuming it's exciting and honorable, there's ways to like create feedback loops, which is largely what we've been talking about today, about attaching the dopaminergic response specifically to the pursuit of that thing rather than the having it. And because I'm so excited and because I so believe in the reality of my goals that I actually could have them and that having them would be awesome, I can create rules in my life, and then I really stick to those rules. So once I'm very careful about what rules I put in place, because I have to believe that they will actually lead me to this goal that's really exciting for me. But if I believe it, then I can put them in. And then also part of my identity is that I'm the type of person that when I set a rule, I follow it. So I can create this loop of like feeling good about myself and the thing that I'm pursuing, but it really works. And I'm shocked how few people have the kind of rule that you're talking about in the new year to say, hey, I'm only going to do odd hours. There's no phone.
Yeah, well, and like I said, I'm not perfect. I'm not as disciplined as you are about my no-goes. I try. I actually find that tabulating is kind of fun. It's also fun to get really triggering comments and and to not close the dopamine loop for them. I think if people understood the dopamine reward prediction error, that we could end all the amplifying comment battles online, because what happens is if someone takes a jab at you of any kind, there's actually an open dopamine loop waiting for you to respond, and any response actually gives them that dopamine response of success. It's a little bit of it's like scoring a three-pointer, and the no response actually drops their dopamine below baseline, and that's its own form of retaliation. And I have to be careful because I don't want to encourage people to retaliate, but anything that short circuits the kind of madness of getting pulled into some online battle that's totally meaningless, it's taking people away from other powerful, good things that they could do in the world. You know, we've been talking mainly about dopamine and its scheduling and about the fact that it can be attached to anything. I think many people find it hard to subjectively attach dopamine to something they don't want to do. This is something that if we'd spoken a year ago, my answer would have been a little bit different to the question of how do you get motivated? Well, one way to do that is if you are good at subjectively attaching dopamine to the pursuit, just knowing, okay, I really am hungry for this. I'm going to tell myself that, making it 1% of the way is a success, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to keep ratcheting on. And that's great if you can do that. But for people that can't do that, understanding this relationship with the pleasure-pain balance can be more powerful. Just understanding the more friction and pain that you experience, the greater the dopamine reward you will get later. And that serves as its own amplifier of the whole process of pursuing more dopamine. And then the other aspect of it is that anytime that we're leaning into action, it has the possibility of being an amplifying process or a depleting process. And the key to that is making sure that you're balancing the dopamine and epinephrine systems. Epinephrine being this molecule of universal currency of energy output. It could be out of hate or it could be out of love. Epinephrine doesn't care. And actually dopamine doesn't care. None of these systems care about us. They just work underneath our conscious control. But when you start to understand that hitting the gas pedal is great, but hitting the gas pedal and then coming off the gas pedal a little bit, you can kind of sit in a more relaxed RPM, actually allows you to go much further. I think that people leaning into action is terrific. I always say you can either be back on your heels, flat-footed, or forward center of mass. The best situation is actually to be right upright, but just know that you can be forward center of mass at any point. And to take it back to sex and reproduction, because it's a salient example, the arc of sex is very interesting because when you think about autonomic arousal, it turns out that the arousal stage of sex actually involves.
Sorry guys, if you were wanting to listen to the end of that. I am pretty much done. So I just want to finish up these cupcakes and then I'll actually show you everything so that you can see how it's supposed to be all together. These, I'm hoping, look how beautiful that's coming out. Oh, the camera doesn't show how extensive the color is. And how bright, and sure, it's amazing. The colors are beautiful. They're super, super bright. So I'm just going to finish these up. So I'm going to put some glitter because it's roses, and I always want to put glitter on roses and flowers. And then I'll show you the complete set. So basically, this is part of a treat. Someone's ordered a treat box. So they've ordered 10 treat boxes. And the theme is the lion, feathers, butterflies, and flowers. Quite a mixture. Hence the reason why there are butterflies on just about everything. And why I did feathers just now, and obviously the flowers. Okay. So it's a combination of, it's a cupcake, a cakesicle. Let me bring them here so you can see them. So yeah, so we're gonna do a cupcake, a cakesicle, and marshmallow pop, and a cookie. So that's the combination that it's going to be. And I think in the darkness, the chocolate is going to, because it's dark, it's going to disappear. So all the bright colors come to life. Anyway, guys, this is me. I am done for today, just in time. Yeah, no, I'm actually done. I'm going to take photos of these. I'm going to pack these up. And yeah, my order's done. It's a fantastic Friday. We are done for the day. Awesome. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this. If you listened to the talking, hope you enjoyed that too. Just some different kind of listening. Anyway, guys, have a fantastic Friday, and I will catch you on next week. Is all about breast cancer. So catch me next week, Wednesday and Friday. Wednesday, I'm doing a fairy figurine. I have a specific little cancer fairy that I'm going to be making, and then on Friday, I'm going to be making a pink velvet cake for cancer to raffle off at my Zumba event next week, Saturday. So have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you soon.